Book 2, Part 4 of the Annals by Publius Cornelius Tacitus, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Graham Redman. The Annals by Publius Cornelius Tacitus, Volume 1, translated by Alfred John Church and William Jackson Brodrib. Book 2, AD 16 to 19, Part 4. While Germanicus was spending the summer in visits to several provinces, Drusus gained no little glory by sowing discord among the Germans and urging them to complete the destruction of the now broken power of Maroboduus. Among the Gotones was a youth of noble birth, Catualda by name, who had formerly been driven into exile by the might of Maroboduus, and who now, when the king's fortunes were declining, ventured on revenge. He entered the territory of the Marcomanni with a strong force, and having corruptly won over the nobles to join him, burst into the palace and into an adjacent fortress. There he found the long accumulated plunder of the Suevi, and camp followers and traders from our provinces who had been attracted to an enemy's land, each from their various homes, first by the freedom of commerce, next by the desire of amassing wealth, finally by forgetfulness of their fatherland. Maroboduus, now utterly deserted, had no resource but in the mercy of Caesar. Having crossed the Danube, where it flows by the province of Noricum, he wrote to Tiberius not like a fugitive or a suppliant, but as one who remembered his past greatness. When, as a most famous king in former days, he received invitations from many nations, he had still, he said, preferred the friendship of Rome. Caesar replied that he should have a safe and honourable home in Italy if he would remain there, or if his interests required something different, he might leave it under the same protection under which he had come. But in the Senate he maintained that Philip had not been so formidable to the Athenians, or Pyrrhus or Antiochus to the Roman people, as was Maroboduus. The speech is extant, and in it he magnifies the man's power, the ferocity of the tribes under his sway, his proximity to Italy as a foe, finally his own measures for his overthrow. The result was that Maroboduus was kept at Ravenna, where his possible return was a menace to the Suevi should they ever disdain obedience. But he never left Italy for 18 years, living to old age and losing much of his renown through an excessive clinging to life. Catualda had a like downfall, and no better refuge. Driven out soon afterwards by the overwhelming strength of the Hermandusi, led by Vibilius, he was received and sent to Forum Julii, a colony of Narbonensian Gaul. The barbarians who followed the two kings, lest they might disturb the peace of the provinces by mingling with the population, were settled beyond the Danube, between the rivers Marus and Cusus, under a king, Vannius, of the nation of the Quadi. Tidings having also arrived of Artaxias being made king of Armenia by Germanicus, the Senate decreed that both he and Drusus should enter the city with an ovation. Arches too were raised round the sides of the temple of Mars the Avenger, with statues of the two Caesars. Tiberius was the more delighted at having established peace by wise policy than if he had finished a war by battle. And so next he planned a crafty scheme against Rescuparis, king of Thrace. That entire country had been in the possession of Rhematalces, after whose death Augustus assigned half to the king's brother Rescuparis, half to his son Cotys. In this division the cultivated lands, the towns, and what bordered on Greek territories fell to Cotys, the wild and barbarous portion, with enemies on its frontier, to Rescuparis. The kings, too, themselves differed, Cotys having a gentle and kindly temper, the other a fierce and ambitious spirit, which could not brook a partner. Still, at first they lived in a hollow friendship, but soon Rescuperus overstepped his bounds, and appropriated to himself what had been given to Cotys, using force when he was resisted, though somewhat timidly under Augustus, who, having created both kingdoms, would, he feared, avenge any contempt of his arrangement. When, however, he heard of the change of emperor, he let loose bands of freebooters, and razed the fortresses as a provocation to war. Nothing made Tiberius so uneasy as an apprehension of the disturbance of any settlement. He commissioned a centurion to tell the kings not to decide their dispute by arms. Cotys at once dismissed the forces which he had prepared. Rescuperus, with assumed modesty, asked for a place of meeting where, he said, they might settle their differences by an interview. There was little hesitation in fixing on a time, a place, finally on terms, as every point was mutually conceded and accepted, by the one out of good nature, by the other with a treacherous intent. Rescuperus, to ratify the treaty, as he said, further proposed a banquet, and when their mirth had been prolonged far into the night, and Cotys amid the feasting and the wine was unsuspicious of danger, he loaded him with chains, though he appealed, on perceiving the perfidy, to the sacred character of a king, to the gods of their common house, and to the hospitable board. Having possessed himself of all Thrace, he wrote word to Tiberius that a plot had been formed against him, and that he had forestalled the plotter. Meanwhile, under pretext of a war against the Bastanian and Scythian tribes, he was strengthening himself with fresh forces of infantry and cavalry. He received a conciliatory answer. If there was no treachery in his conduct, he could rely on his innocence. But neither the emperor nor the senate would decide on the right or wrong of his cause without hearing it. He was therefore to surrender Cotys, come in person, and transfer from himself the odium of the charge. This letter Latinius Pandus, propraetor of Maesia, sent to Thrace, with soldiers to whose custody Cotys was to be delivered. Rescuperus, hesitating between fear and rage, preferred to be charged with an accomplished rather than with an attempted crime. He ordered Cotys to be murdered, and falsely represented his death as self-inflicted. Still the emperor did not change the policy which he had once for all adopted. On the death of Pandus, whom Rescuperus accused of being his personal enemy, he appointed to the government of Maesia Pomponius Flaccus, a veteran soldier, specially because of his close intimacy with the king and his consequent ability to entrap him. Flaccus, on arriving in Thrace, induced the king by great promises, though he hesitated and thought of his guilty deeds, to enter the Roman lines. He then surrounded him with a strong force, under pretence of showing him honour, and the tribunes and centurions, by counsel, by persuasion, and by a more undisguised captivity the further he went, brought him, aware at last of his desperate plight, to Rome. He was accused before the Senate by the wife of Cotys, and was condemned to be kept a prisoner far away from his kingdom. Thrace was divided between his son Rhematalces, who, it was proved, had opposed his father's designs, and the sons of Cotys. As these were still minors, Trebellianus Rufus, an ex-praetor, was appointed to govern the kingdom in the meanwhile, after the precedent of our ancestors, who sent Marcus Lepidus into Egypt as guardian to Ptolemy's children. Rescuperus was removed to Alexandria, and there attempting, or falsely charged with attempting, escape, was put to death. About the same time Vonones, who, as I have related, had been banished to Cilicia,